Well, let me explain what motivated us to do this study before I go into the study results and why we are concerned about the future of democracy and how it is linked with the digital age. Well, I mean, the concern starts with the fact that we well know, we are exposed to it almost every day. It's fake news. It's the existence of weaponized information. Well, there's nothing new about weaponized information or disinformation, but unlikely ordinary lies and propaganda, which always aims to make you believe something. How we respond to what's happening in the technological sphere. And then, well, I mean, through marketing and through the gadgets, we even see this segment, this individualization within the family. So it's not just like the guy who goes out with the headphones in the public library. No, we see it at home. We all have our own devices. We have all our own channels and our own profiles, and on Netflix, each of us in the family is watching different things. So again here, individualization. There's even not a kind of public space in the family. That's like the metaphor here. Well, and beyond that, so we see the singularization, the individualization of public spaces, but then there's like much more. We see the huge economic gaps in wealth and in security, the insider-outsider problem. So we see a lot of economic and cultural precarity. We have like a huge problem, not just with the outer ecology, so to speak, with our climate change, but also with our inner ecology, the spiritual precariousness that we experience, and definitely what we might call like a broken status economy. There's so many people who don't feel like recognized and don't feel like they're seen. They feel like they don't exist in this world. Or they feel like it doesn't matter if they exist or not. So it's really a problem about status and being seen from others, feeling like you're recognized as a human being. And this all leads to one essential thing, and this is like the core of social media, I guess. Because you're on this platform to get social confirmation, to get social rewards. The people say, you're great, that's good photo, great move on TikTok, etc., etc. And social media are kind of build an arena where you see like a hyperinflation of those kind of reward loops. And again, the social reward, the social confirmation, the feedback, the reciprocity gets drawn out of like a space of friendships and family and community into a marketplace where you compete with others over the attention and over getting social confirmation. And why are people seeking that? Because they don't get it in, let's call it, the real life. That's one of the reasons, but I think an important one. And this all leads to what we read in the newspapers and magazines, like, oh, we are so polarized, and there's all those echo chambers, and they are real. This polarization is an effect of what I described before, the individualization, but very, very importantly, the disappearance of public spaces or civic spaces of encounter where people who are different can meet as equals. That's like the idea of a public space. And this is like a typical retweet graph. You will find many studies now from colleagues in network science, and it's real, looks like that. You have two different worlds, two different groups, two different tribes, two different ways to co-create reality, so to speak. And there's just like a handful of brokers in between who might be able to mediate. 1 point a year, and this is like would be like a talk in itself. When you have in a network a situation like that, where you have a completely polarized constellation, and you've only what we call like balanced triads. So you have just friends and foes, and my friend is only together with people I also regard as a friend, and my enemies are linked with people I also regard as my enemies. So it's all like, if you have that, it's super, super difficult and even almost impossible to depolarize a network. It's just like, we know this from studies from history, because it's very stable. The peer pressure is so huge. The costs of defection, of diverting from the leading opinion of your tribe, so the punishment, the social costs, the exclusion costs are so high, but that you hang on to a story, to a lie, to whatever, just in order to stay within your tribe, because it's your tribe. You have no alternative. So peer pressure is increased. So that makes it so stable. And I think that's what we see also now in the United States. I mean, talking about fake news, I was reading yesterday, I think it was in the New York Times, there was a Pew survey done by Pew Research, and they find out that already now it's 32 or 33% of Americans believe that the attack on their capital was a false flag attack conducted by Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And this is like 1/3 already believe that, and it will be just like a matter of weeks. Still, like in those red zones, the opinions, the stories will kind of consolidate, and then you have like 40-45% who believe that. They believe it because they belong to the group, and the story is just like the reference for bonding together, independent of it's true or not. So we see this, and all that, as we know, and this is now from the EU, this polarization, the fake news, this overwhelmment leads to a constant increase of distrust in national parliaments and all what we know from what we call like representative democracy. Distrust is rising, the dissatisfaction, all the studies, all reasons show that we have like an increase in the dissatisfaction across the world, specifically in Europe, and we see this rise of authoritarianism all around. And well, Donald Trump was defeated, but this is just like, as I think we all sense, and I think we can agree on that. And I don't want to talk about Trump here too much. We should get at least for a few weeks get rid of the meme, the Trump meme. But I think we sense that are winning, that one group is winning over the other, is not a solution. It's not this is not a solution when you have this polarized setup, and this is not um, this is not the solution. So, but we see that, and we can expect that it will have like a continuously like a high amount of like those authoritarian interpretations of or yeah, manifestations as represented through those guys here, specifically China. I think is a very scary or an interesting case. Interesting and scary at the same time. So what is the difference between liberal democracy and authoritarianism? I think it's very straightforward and very easily to explain so that everyone can understand it. Liberal democracy means how to get along with people you disagree with, how to get along with people you don't like. Whereas authoritarianism is all about how to get rid of people you disagree with, or silence them, and how to mute people you don't like and you don't care. Throw them out. It's not about getting along. And therefore, it's about increasing tensions, increasing them in the authoritarian, like Leo Löwenthal once said, like in this wonderful book of Prophets of Deceit, like written in 1949 about the American agitators. That's how he called the agitators, the right-wing agitators in the 30s and 40s in this study, and they said fascism is an inverse or psychoanalysis. It's about increasing tensions and not reducing tensions. And this is what liberal democracy tries: get along with people, reduce, mitigate tensions, collaborate, compromise, conflict transformation as a central theme. This is a feature, and whereas in the authoritarian thing, it's all about winning over others, dominate others, intimidate others. They are the losers, we're the winners, etc. I think we've heard enough about that over the last 4 or 5 years. And so liberal democracy means that we are able to manage disagreement and think about it. It was like the invention of the printing press. This was like the original disruptive information technology because it led to centuries of religious wars and chaos here in Europe. So the moment where you have a liberation of how the information flew through societies, it caused a lot of turmoil and bitter years and very much of war and devastation. And the reaction to that was, and this was like the move of the Enlightenment, to say, well, we cannot hand over the reality check to priests and authoritarian rulers. Let's decentralize it. Let's hand it over to a plural social network. A plural social network of scientists, of courts, of entrepreneurs, of experts. Let's hand it over let's distribute it. Let's decentralize the way how we co-create reality. And but it's not about here in this case agreeing on the facts, because we will never really agree on the facts completely, but we agree on the rules and method how we validate something. So there's elections. This is a method that we agree on, not the outcome, because there's winners and losers, but the method itself must be legitimate, or that we have peer reviews in science, or that there's separation of power, or in journalism that we double check sources. So there's like an institutionalized method to manage pluralistic views and disagreement. So liberal democracy is not about like, oh, we all like and love each other and we're like all like, no, it's how to, conflict is the reason. We know that we disagree. We know that we don't agree on the facts, and therefore we agree on a method how through a distributed network, through a distributed social network of academics, journalists, courts, parliaments, we come to results. So, and this is exactly what we see where the attacks are. The attacks are not just like on, okay, I want to get rid of the other, but it's also like the attack on the method itself, um, um, uh, uh, how we produce, so to speak, winners, and what is the method, how to construct truth, talking about science, etc. And so, and there's four pillars that liberal democracy is built on in order to find a way to get along with people you disagree with. And it's like the classics, it's like direct democracy, that's Rousseau's vision, with the representative democracy model, but for example, on Scalesen, we have the participatory and the deliberative democracy model. And all those different models have different characteristics, or have different um, uh, have different strengths. And this is like a very important, this was in our research to come up with this model, a very important breakthrough, um, because you might have heard that there's like, oh, we need more direct democracy, or we need less, or let's have more participation or less. So the thing is, all those different forms and types of democracy are important and are strengthening each other in a continuous attempt to to democratize our world. So democracy is more a process. It's about democratization. It's not a thing. It's not something that we arrived and we said, okay, now we have democracy. No, it's a process. And think about deliberation, because deliberation facilitates listening and learning and understanding, which is a pre-requirement for a successful participation. So if you know how to deliberate, your participation processes will be good or have quality. And if you have our participation, the way you represent your constituencies might be much more legitimate. And if you have good representation, this makes the complexity of our society manageable, because if you have no delegate who is in part, who has the agenda and is legitimate to negotiate a compromise. So if you're just like this swarm and we're all like a multitude and there's no representation, who would be able to negotiate? So that's a real technical problem of swarms and crowds. Also, when we talk about the wisdom of the crowd. So you have to someone who has the mandate to cut the deal, to say no or yes. And last but not least, direct voting makes democracy legitimate in the first place. So what you see here is now that those in the small different types of democracy have different numbers of people who can participate, and there's a different scale of integration, a depth of integration, how much complexity we can process, how much, what is also the scale or the of ambiguity that we can hold together. And in the deliberative context, just a few people cannot not have deliberation with billions of people, with millions of people. You can have direct voting with millions of people, but you can go much, much deeper when you deliberate with someone, compared with like a direct vote on yes or no. Do you want A or yes or no? And technology now can have like either can be used to strengthen deliberation, participation, representation, and also the direct democratic processes, or you use technology to weaken them, to destroy them. Technology can do both. You can have through shit posting destroy every meaningful dialogue, which is happening, which is the goal, right? Uh, flop the song with shit, as Steve Bannon said, and destroy meaningful discourse. But at the same time, technology can give us tools that makes it easier to have discourse and deliberation over space and time. So it is something that is kind of neutral at first place, and but we know much more from the negative aspects of technology than from the positive, because we know how bot swarms and ballot stuffing and astroturfing is kind of undermining the direct democracy. This whole deep fake news, all yeah, I talked about trolling, sheet posting. This whole information overload is destroying our capacity for complex dialogue. We don't have the attention span anymore. So there's a lot of negative things happening. But in our study, we said, well, I mean, who are those guys who have used technology for the good? So what do we have experts and thought leaders who can help us how technology impacts democracy, but also who is using technology that directly targets and challenges those tactics I've talked about before, and where are those who use technology to strengthen civic engagement, strengthen pluralism and liberal democracy? Who are they? Why don't we know more about them? I mean, why are we not reading the newspapers and magazines on a daily basis about those civic activists who try to promote something? And that's that's not dystopic, but that's helps us to update democracy, to develop new ways to strengthen liberal democracy as our institutionalized process to manage disagreement and figure out a way to get along with people you dislike and don't agree with and have different interests with. And this is what we did. We had 150 interviews, and some of you, or most of you among you, thank you so much. We're participated in the study, and you shared your views about who you regard as being our role models, best practice cases that I talked about, or in those areas I talked about before. We generated data on 603 organizations, and there's many people also in the network. On the average, you nominated 6 organizations or persons, and most nominations are referred to United States and UK, but then with Germany, we had our focus was Europe. Although it was Europe, a lot of pointers, a lot of our nominations are referred to the United States. And and this what you see here is the network of digital thought leaders and tech reformers. And when you look at the network, you see those arcs. And by the way, you will get a poster with the network after this talk. So we provided the material. I just want to explain what you see here. You see here an arc indicates that somebody from these institutions nominated these institutions, and the stronger the link, the more frequently there was a nomination. And you see here different clusters in the network. from a network perspective, you see there's no clear center, so it's a classical modularized distributed network. And there's a reason for that, because it's different communities with a different identity who who refer to each other. So we have like a digital rights cluster, so activists are who focus on privacy and freedom of expression. We have here an Eastern European civic tech cluster, where it's where transparency and civic participation is at the core of the work. You have like what we call the democracy activist cluster, where it's really about mobilization, using technology to mobilize, spread, make it easier for to spread to gather or assemble petitions, make it easier for organizing communities. You have like a huge European civic tech cluster, and also the peace building cluster in the network. But we also, so it's like we call them identities. And it's important because I will come back to it, because those identities, they're part of this kind of network, but they're not necessarily know a lot about each other. So there's strong identity within, but not so much across those communities. So we have the digital rights activists, we have the democracy activists, we have journalists and fact checking as a like a where we find a lot of organizations with the civic tech reformers. So where it's all about enhancing transparency, fostering participation with the open and commons folks, with the peace building and the community arts cluster in this network. So asking if they feel part of a strong or rather strong network, you see they feel part of a strong network. But it's a strong network within the community and not necessarily across those identities that you see. But there's an identity there. That's a very important thing. So there's like with the values, with their code, with their how they approach their own quality. We also calculated the key organizations at the organizations level. We use some network measures here, and I just give you here a short view on the ranking. So we have like here based on our calculation, their European Digital Rights Organization here, kind of number one, My Society, Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, number three, etc., etc. But I don't, maybe, look, it's not really about like promoting here people. It's not about what do we mean by centrality in a decentralized, modularized network. That's very important, because if you have a core periphery network, those measures would be make much more sense, because you have local centralities in a modularized distributed network. So I just please, so it's just not this is not a measure for global influence, because you have those identities and they're distributed. You don't have at this moment a strategic global center core of organizations dealing with the phenomena I talked before. There's different topics of interest, and we looked at who's working on, also is working on, and this is, I think, a beautiful map, because it shows you what journalists, the peace building, what are the topics, what are they working on, and the tech reformers, and where is the overlap? Where do we see like the common ground at this moment? And you see the information fact checking thing, accountability, transparency, open data. So there are some of those topics that are kind of where's overlap between those communities, and they also might be like a nice way to start a conversation around those topics. There were like communities that were like really missing on the map. Again, we did 150 interviews, and it was really a surprise. For example, that when we talk about this framework of disinformation, democracy, and I shared these questions before, there was like just a few nominations of really like pointing towards the design, the Silicon Valley design and ethics community represented like by Tristan Harris. He was just like mentioned one time. I mean, that's a fact. 150 interviews, just one person pointed to Tristan's institute. Also, like this whole persuasive technologies community, this whole like overlap of technology and behaviorism was not really mentioned, and also the public mental health community was not nominated. And again, in the method that we use to use the snowball interview technique, so who do you think is important? We're not forcing people. So for us, it's really a way to reconstruct the stratosphere, how they see the world, how the mental map they have about the field, and are therefore whatever the future brings, and we'll talk about next steps in a moment. Those communities that we miss on the map, we have to bring them closer to the democracy communities, the 7 identities I talked before, because there is a gap. There seems to be like a social, probably also a cognitive disconnect and distance that we have to bridge. So, so we also talked about actions. So what should be done in order to harness the good and ward off the bad of technology. This is something you can, when you look through the slides by yourself, you can study it in detail. So it's, of course, it's about regulation. It's about our education and our digital literacy, this whole awareness thing. And of course, how can we have like more of participatory platforms to leverage technology to support liberal democracy, given the fact that we have a network with strong identities, but not necessarily across those communities. And this was seen and recognized by those we talked with. We also asked about how could the philanthropic sector support them, and you see, number one, core funding, well, money, long term. This is not something where we will not see change and impact from tomorrow. It's like a long, we're here in the long game, so to speak. And yeah, we need collaboration, we need new networks and alliances, and build bridges between technologists, policymakers, journalists. I will come to this in a moment. So it's like it was like a bunch of recommendations that are all like point to platforms, money, collaboration, but also like awareness, a lot to do in this field. And I really think that we're right at the beginning here, because this whole like AI thing, it's really like something that's got to be addressed and democratized. Otherwise, we're literally going to lose our democracy. What we tried to come up with in the study was not just who is important, but also what could be a story, what could be a shared story. And digital humanism is something that came up for 2 reasons. First of all, here in the city of Vienna, it's like from the Museum of Modern Arts, or of Applied Arts, excuse me. It's Christoph Thun Hohenstein who established, was I think 7, 8 years ago, I heard first time this notion, this concept of digital humanism. And then, of course, there's Tristan Harris Center for Human Technologies, who said, okay, what is a human technology? It's technology that's good for people. And this brought us to the core question. So if we want to have like technology that's good for people, what do we mean by what is good? And this is exactly what we also know what movements are doing. It's like this famous Marshall Gans quote that movements and the narratives are not just about rearranging economics and politics. They also rearrange meaning because they try also to figure out what is good. So it's not just about the redistribution of the goods, it's about figuring out what is good. And this is like, if we don't have an answer, and we say, yeah, technology is good for people, but what do we mean by that? What's our answer? And this is like the work we gotta do. And it's also like when we talk about the good society, what do we mean by the good society? What do we mean by the good life? And therefore, we referred to a project we also did together with Werner Fingenstein-Bachstein, who's also, I guess, part of the call today. This is with Politicus, what we call like the summer place projects, where we went back to human needs theories over the last 150 years, looked at them, and came up with a human needs model, and we call them vitalities, and we call them vitalities because a human need is something, if not addressed, we got sick, either physically or mentally, and our society gets anomic. That's like the basic idea. And we said, okay, if there's technology that helps us with our understanding, that's good technology. If it's technology that helps us so that we have responsibilities, duties, a social life, that's great. That's good technology. If it helps us to have friendship, empathy, that's great. If it helps us to have food, shelter, work, wonderful, etc., etc. If it helps us to have leisure, dreams, if it supports us in our imagination, creativity, if it gives us autonomy and freedom, that's great. If it's increasing resilience, it's great, etc., etc. I think you got the idea. You get the idea here. Good technology that's good for people. We have to deal with the concept of what do we mean by good. This also, and that's why we came up with this notion of digital humanism and a definition where we said, okay, digital humanism means creating technology that's good for people and democracy. That's Tristan's version, good for people. We added to democracy because we need democracy to manage our disagreements and our shadows. It addresses the whole spectrum of human needs and puts democratization and civic engagement at the center of technological development. It's an agenda for a technological shift from downgrading human potential. This is also Tristan phrase, but we added to empowering individual and collective human vitality and agency. So we really tried our best to say, well, why movement? Movement because we have to figure it out. We have to figure out what do we mean by good. That's what movements are doing, and I don't want to stress. It's not just a catchphrase. Nowadays, everything wants to be a movement, but I take it in a literal sense, like Marshall Gans, and follow Marshall Gans here. And by the way, this is what George Akerlof is reminding us. He's a Nobel laureate. He says if a community, a network, or an organization has no criteria, does not know what it means to be a good performance, if we don't know how to measure good, how to assess this, if we don't know when do we applaud each other, because that's technology that's good for people, good for people and democracy. If we don't know, we're weak. It's a weak, ineffective movement. It's a weak, ineffective network. So therefore, we need our ear. So I'm gonna skip that because of time. What we propose here as a follow-up, we also did like a workshop with representatives of those different identities, and we worked on what does it need to strengthen their work. And there were like several key factors that emerge. We need long-term concepts like this digital humanism concept that we try to bring forth, but we need those transversal networks. We have to bridge to other civil society sectors, avoid duplication, reclaim space for creativity, not just driven by the economic needs of the organization, and we have to produce real technology. And this brings me to the blue button experience at the beginning. I start with blue button, I get thrown out, I get kicked out of the tool. If we would have used Zoom to say, it wouldn't have happened. So why I'm bringing this up, this again was like an experience. I don't want to, I want to blame blue button, but it's the fact that it almost uh, it almost, how should I say, trashed my presentation here, our gathering. So fortunately, we had a plan B. But it's like, again, we need real technology that works, that's competitive. That's not that's something that we have to aim for. And for that, we want to build a platform where we bring all those groups together. We don't have this platform now. We have, as we saw, as we've seen, the distributed modularized network at the community scale on the left side, and then we have those what I call the missing communities, the missing identities, the gaps, like the tech companies, the fundraisers, the digital persuasive technologies, the designers, the public health experts. So it's really there is groups missing, but I think we have now at least an idea about the landscape and we know who's missing. And what we want to do is like establish, or this is what we propose here is a follow-up, and I hope we will get somehow possibilities and resources to do that, to have real like what we call a situation room where those groups come together and work on very, very specific questions. Number one, the values, the stories. What is tech that is good for people and democracy? And I add and planet, of course, right? So we need those. We need a story that we share. Otherwise, we're weak. How to democratize AI and the platforms? All the question with regulatory and access. So, what models do we have when we talk about regulation? How to increase digital literacy and educate kids and policymakers alike? Absolutely decisive. What are the best practices? How can we work together? How to move forward here? Number four, how to scale civic tech to become real competitive tech. As again, a lot of attempts, but how to scale them so that it's real, like an alternative to Zoom and the Silicon Valley like companies, the chat houses and whatever will emerge here in the future. And last but not least, how to foster technology for how to update liberal democracy. How can we use this that we can use technology for having shared situation awareness, making deliberation, decision making easier, consensus making, and how to bring back the disenfranchised into the arena of co-creating reality. So how can we do that? How can you break up in a network it's algorithmically enforced, polarized? How can we depolarize a network without war, without violence? So we don't know yet. We are not smart enough yet, and we need discourse on that and ideas and experiments, etc., etc. So I want to close here with one last thing because I talked a lot about disinformation and about fake news, etc., etc. And there is the fake news of our own mind that I want to refer to. This is what's happening when we observe ourselves, how much crap, how much false assumptions, how much of like prejudices go through our head, and it's real also like an invitation to self-knowledge here. It's like this othering of so we all like recreate and reproduce this world and where the immune system to deal with fake news is so weak or became so weakened. And there's a lot to do also with ourselves, with our own stories, our own story making. And this is something that's not a technological game. It's really about self-awareness, self-knowledge, and our and no technology in the world will kind of will do this work for us. So we have to do it ourselves. And so I'm sorry for the hiccups, the serious hiccups at the very beginning. I hope it was interesting. I hope you still got time, 15 more minutes for Q&As. I'm happy to answer them if possible. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Harold. I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Super. All right. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the hiccups again. We gathered a few questions here up front. We will put this talk online on our homepage, and you will also receive a poster with the results, for instance, like the network that I'm sure you want to take a really close look at, find your own organization and your colleagues as well, see where you're embedded at exactly. I will send this after the webinar via email. So you will receive all the material. We want to share it with you. Further, I have a few questions, Harold. I'm just going to pick one I personally find interesting. You talked a lot about liberal democracy. Jan says he found this focus very interesting. He says, don't you find democratic and distributive technologies undermine notions of private capital or of property ownership, leading us to social democracy or democratic socialism? Can technology reshape the way democracy and politics itself work? Can it open up the space, I understand from this question? What are your thoughts?
I mean, well, the answer is yes. As I said, I mean, you can design technology that destroys our deliberation, that destroys our experience to encounter people who have a different mindset and have a kind of agree on a method or to deal with our disagreement. Or you can use technology to really support it and find not just common ground, but also sometimes help you to understand yourself, your own position better. Conflict is conflict, first of all, just means there's an alternative. There's A and B. So there's a variety in our system. And I think that when we talk about ownership, when we talk about the governance structure and how we can use those platforms and the infrastructure in a way that it supports our life, that we have that we get things done to be to have more time to engage with others. So we said, like, how can we use those tools to make it easier to engage in the so-called offline world? And what are hybrid solutions? I mean, I think we agree on the future will be like hybrid online, offline solutions. But for that, we first have to understand that democracy does not mean that the majority wins over the minority, but that democracy means we have serious differences and there's a plurality of viewpoints, and we have no dictator and no centralized person who decides unilaterally what is true and what the reality is. So we have to accept that there's a relativistic approach here, and I think technology could support this beautifully, same like the distributed energy networks or decentralized whatsoever. But we'll currently see the reverse thing. We see more monopolies, more centralization again, and less of like our activation of the periphery.
And we have a few questions regarding our map. Sander says it's very impressive. Well, thank you, Sander. He says, how can we build on it to develop new connections and explore new collaborations? And Joe adds to this, could we please open the map and keep it updated collectively?
I think, first of all, the data we're really happy to share, because we don't use the data for, we use it so that we say, okay, where are the cognitively and social, where are the clusters that are cognitively or socially distanced? So, and then how can we bring them together so that you have here like a gradient of ideas of people who don't know each other yet, but they're kind of part of like a shared mindset or a shared purpose. And I think there is a shared purpose, and that's something to do with empower people, make democracy stronger in terms of how to make it possible that we disagree and are and have a life well lived and well discovered, the well discovered life, the well lived life, uh, and for that, I'm happy to. We are happy to share who's out there, and we really should also figure out a way how to keep it updated or how to add institutions that are not on a map yet, because it's not complete, of course, because we are, as I said, there's gaps. But the more we learn about those gaps, the more we're able to have like a new portfolio of people working together and knowing from each other. And the way I would use the map is just like where I'm on the map, look at your own position, then look at, okay, who's around? What are those guys doing? Who do I know? And how can we figure out what would be like a topic we can work side by side or face to face, or again, what we propose or will be like have a platform to work on very specific questions, or that I think and have a strategy to so that the output, the outcome of the platform really gets multiplied, and the policymakers are part of it, the journalists are right about it. So really have a inspire and strengthen the conversation about those topics. And it's more than just like, oh, there's echo chambers, it's a problem. Oh, there is monopolies, that's a problem, but nobody's doing anything about it because we have no plan B. So what would be a plan B? That's what we think we should work on together. What is the alternative? So that we use the technology to be stronger and not weaker, and that's our what our attempt is going to be.
I read that Harry has a concern in regards to opening up this information on the map. He's concerned that it would rather facilitate attacks from those opposing forces that are not in our map. It will give them the information. And he also is concerned because they are better sourced and they are more closely knitted. So he asks, how can we defend against that while also being open at the same time? He sees a dilemma in that.
This is a very, very fair and good question. This is, by the way, a question where I would say I would start from the place of not knowing. So we would have to really deliberate on that. How can we probably have a creative way to share it among each other in a secure way without just like throwing it, dumping it out or on the internet and say, well, those are those who try to fight the disinformation propaganda and the troll swarm of armies in the world. But you're right, it would be naive. But for that we need a conversation. To find a way that's probably original and creative.
Jeremy has a question about the methodology. He asks, how correlated was the mapping with the geographical location of the interviews individuals? Central Europe is very strong, were also most of the interviews from there.
Well, right. Yes and no. I mean, it's not it's not so. Sometimes of course, you have your regional clusters, and you have and again, because those networks, they have their own stratospheres, and therefore groups always exclude others. And this is not this is this is the way it is. So you can avoid that, but and then it makes a lot of sense to reduce complexity, etc. But there's pointers, cross-national pointers, so it's not just a geographic frame. But what I really was surprised was the disconnect to the valley of what's happening in California. And again, whatever the explanation is, you have conferences, you have, again, 150 people, but there is something that's not established yet, and I think we should work on that.
Okay, now there's a discussion developing in the chat about our previous topic, so can we use that tools? But I also want to ask a question that I left out so far. You mentioned Tristan Harris. How do you feel his documentary, The Social Dilemma, will influence public awareness for a movement on digital humanism?
I think Tristan's contribution is huge, and he's more like he's like a meme warrior. He establishes a language that helps us to talk about those phenomena. By the way, it was also for us when we started the study, it was really half the effort went into find a language. What do we mean by democracy, etc. So when you start with that, it really, how can we, so what is the language? And I think Tristan's documentary contributed a lot. But, and here's the but, I was really surprised that Tristan and his team didn't come up with more suggestions on alternatives, how to use technology in a different way. So it was very dystopic, it was, again, it's not a critique. I was just surprised because I know that they are working on alternative concepts. And so that the end of the documentary was like, okay, what's now? And I have like this year also, like teach at the university, and with my students, we're working on this year on what are regulatory regimes that might help us to counter those developments. And we did test of research on what's happening around the world to regulate social media. And the thing was, and this was like, and the same with me, that my work on this topic, and it was the same with the students, does not change my user behavior at all. So I'm as addicted as everyone else. I watch 5 hours a day, look at my screen. It's very tough and difficult for me to unlock. So, and this is what I think points to what Tristan always says, that it's really beyond our will. We need already technology to help us, like an antiviral filter to deal with those brain hacking powerful tools that are applied. And I think, yeah, Tristan is very important, and it's really, I hope that there's more like more to come on the solutions side.
All right. Thank you, everyone. It's 2:15. I don't want to stretch your time. I thank you for coming. I thank you for your patience. We will forward the recording of this webinar as well as the research results in the form of a poster. And yeah, I wish you all have a lovely day.